Greetings friends, my name is Carson Barlow and welcome to Humanity 3.0. Right now I can identify about 7 areas that's worth considering when it comes to maturity. Now I plan on just giving you the high levels of these and then in my future videos going into more detail about them. So let's dive right on in. So first we have physical maturity. You'd think that something like this would be something as straightforward as whether you're done with puberty or not, but I prefer to take a more sophisticated approach. Do you know your body? Basically you need to ask yourself, how well do you know your own body? Are you familiar with its strengths or limitations? Do you know how much rest you need? Do you know how to wind down for the night? What foods make you sick? What foods do your body utilize well? Now there are plenty of other considerations, but you can basically sum it up with these 2 questions. Do you understand your body? And do you think for yourself when it comes to treating your body? Now moving on to intellectual maturity. This again comes down to understanding yourself, knowing what your mental strengths and weaknesses are, but also understanding what biases you have, and having the ability to think for yourself when it comes to what ideas you will or will not buy into. Do you have a love of learning? Are you aware of a number of things that you don't know? How willing are you able to admit to yourself when you're wrong? If you're anything like me, then you actually enjoy discovering when you're wrong. And how well do you do logic? And can you detect logical fallacies? As I'm sure you can guess, intellectual maturity is kind of my jam. Next is spiritual maturity. Now, if you look at Google's definition of maturity, here's what you're going to get. The quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. So while this is the most accepted definition of spirituality, I'm going to flex my intellectual muscles and come up with an approach that, in my opinion, is much more effective and is far less prone to dogmatic thinking as many of your common forms of spirituality. Religion! So this is how I see it. Now let's say that you are running through the forest getting chased by a rabid grizzly bear. I would imagine that you'd be running just as fast if you merely thought you were being chased by a grizzly bear than if you actually were. So I see spirituality as a way of using visualization and a suspension of disbelief in order to incite physical, mental, and emotional responses in your body. So when considering spiritual maturity, how well are you able to regulate your systems using these visualizations? Next on our list is emotional maturity. I see emotions as one way we regulate our physiological systems. Don't believe me? Consider what the enrage buff would do in any given video game. You can tell if you're emotionally mature by being able to effectively manage all of your emotions, and not by merely suppressing your negative ones while mindlessly chasing after the positive ones. Are you able to experience the richness in life through the spectrum and complexities of human emotion? Do you have a relationship with your emotions that allow you to express them in non-destructive ways? I could go on and on and on about all these, but I gotta keep moving. Social maturity is next. So, full disclosure, I don't really consider myself socially mature, so I'm gonna be shooting from the hip on this one. But what I see as social maturity is being able to read other people's emotions, being able to communicate a vibe while simultaneously being able to detect vibes from others. Do you know how to not be a dick? I don't know, maybe being a dick is a viable social strategy. Now just as everybody's physical needs are different, so too are their social needs different. Having an awareness of what social settings you prefer or thrive in is a good thing. But being able to navigate social situations in which you're less enthusiastic about is a sign of social maturity. Now let's consider sexual maturity. Now as with physical maturity, puberty does have something to do with it, but doesn't tell the whole story. Now much of sexuality lies on spectrums, and having sexual maturity is being able to understand and accept where you are on those spectrums at any given time. Sexual maturity isn't merely about whether you can experience sexual pleasure. It's about knowing how to give and receive sexual pleasure. It's about knowing the time and place to engage in various levels of sexual activity. It's about not being ashamed of who you are and how you feel sexually. It's about knowing how to balance safety with pleasure. This last one can be easier for some rather than others, depending on what you're into. And finally, the last thing that I'd like to consider is cognitive maturity. Now, philosophically speaking, I haven't quite fleshed this one out yet, but I'll give you what I've got so far. In our prefrontal cortex lies the parts of our brain that's responsible for executive functions. This is responsible for memory, inhibition, initiation, memory, focus, activity transition, memory. I think I might have missed one. I believe that cognitive maturity is understanding your strengths and weaknesses in these categories and developing the skills to properly manage them. Again, I've just barely been recently putting thought into this idea, It could very well fall apart on me upon further contemplation. Only time will tell. But I greatly look forward to going over these in more detail in the weeks to come. Stay classy.